"Why the hell are you standing outside like that? If you're gonna fire me, do it. But don't you dare look at my kids like they're some kind of charity case." The paper bag in her hands ripped, groceries tumbling to the cracked porch, as Victoria's voice trembled between rage and shame. Newport, Rhode Island was a postcard in real life. All stone mansions, iron gates, and generational wealth so old, it didn't speak out loud. It whispered. Behind the towering hedges and ocean views sat Vinland Estate, a relic of elegance owned by a man who had forgotten how to feel. Harry Coleman, 71, hadn't missed a morning routine in 30 years. Every day at 6 a.m., he read the Wall Street Journal. At 6:30 he drank his espresso, 2 sugars always from the same china cup. And at 6:45 sharp, the household staff moved like ghosts through the corridors of Vinland. But on this particular Thursday, something had shifted. Not in the world, but in him. Across the estate, Victoria Ellison was tying the second strap on her worn nursing shoes. Her uniform was clean but faded, her movements practiced but tight with exhaustion. She moved silently through the mansion, dusting things that cost more than her yearly salary. Victoria had 2 reasons to keep breathing, and both were waiting at home, one in a wheelchair, the other with wild curls and a hunger for bedtime stories. She didn't resent the job, not really, but there were mornings where just walking through those marble hallways felt like swallowing stones, especially when Harry Coleman never even looked her in the eye. In Harry's world, staff were shadows, efficient, quiet, invisible. But lately he'd been noticing Victoria, not in any romantic sense, not yet, but in a way that unnerved him. She never smiled unless it was to herself. She didn't make small talk, and yet she was gentle with the furniture, as if it deserved kindness he didn't. One morning, he caught her in the reflection of a gilded mirror, adjusting a small pin on her uniform, a blue ribbon with a name on it. He asked her what it was for. She jumped. "It's just my son's name, Elijah, for strength." Harry didn't respond, but he didn't forget. That Thursday, she left earlier than usual, said her daughter wasn't feeling well. She didn't know he heard. She didn't know he watched from the upstairs window as she walked briskly down the driveway, grocery bag in hand, jacket too thin for the Rhode Island wind. And something inside him, something he didn't recognize, stood up. He told his driver to take the long route. Then he told him to follow Victoria. Back in her neighborhood, far from the sea breeze and marble estates, Victoria turned the corner to her home. A small, leaning duplex with peeling paint and a ramp built by hand. 2 faces lit up from the porch. Her daughter jumped to her feet. "See, Mommy brought our food," she shouted, spinning in delight. Beside her, a boy, maybe 11, smiled from his wheelchair, eyes full of a wisdom too old for his age. Inside the car, Harry stared. The bags she carried weren't just groceries. They were survival. They were sacrifice in plastic handles. And when Victoria hugged her kids, pressing her forehead to theirs, she didn't look like a maid. She looked like a queen hiding in plain sight. But he wasn't supposed to be there. And when she finally noticed him, she snapped. "Why the hell are you standing outside like that? If you're going to fire me, do it. But don't you dare look at my kids like they're some kind of charity case." The bag burst open. Bread and canned soup rolled onto the porch, and just like that the world turned upside down. The groceries scattered across the porch like a quiet explosion. A can of beans rolled slowly, bumping against the polished tip of Harry Coleman's shoe. But he didn't move, he didn't speak. Victoria's hands shook at her sides, her breath sharp and uneven. It wasn't just anger burning behind her eyes. It was something deeper, something older. Shame, pride, fear, exhaustion. A lifetime packed into one trembling moment. "I didn't come here to fire you," Harry finally said, his voice low, unsteady, unfamiliar even to himself. "Then what?" she snapped, chin high. "You thought it'd be entertaining? A charity field trip to the poor black maid's house?" Behind her, Elijah's wheelchair creaked forward, his wide eyes scanning the man in the suit standing silently at the curb. And Amari, still holding onto the doorframe, crouched down to gather the loaf of bread that had fallen, clutching it to her chest like it was treasure. Harry's gaze drifted to the children. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just a woman who worked in his kitchen. This was a mother, a protector, a provider, and he was the one who'd invaded something sacred. "I didn't expect," he started, but even he didn't know how to finish that sentence. "You didn't expect me to have a life?" Victoria asked, her voice softer now but no less fierce. "Didn't expect me to be a person with a home? With children who don't beg, but survive?" She knelt down and began gathering the rest of the groceries. Her hands moved fast, but her eyes were red. Harry stepped forward to help. She didn't even look up. "Don't," she said sharply. "You don't get to help me now. Not like this. Not in front of them." There was no scream, no sobbing, but somehow those words hit harder than anything else had. Harry froze in place, helpless. For once, money couldn't fix this. He turned and walked back toward the car. Just as the door opened, a voice called out behind him. "Mister?" Elijah's voice was soft but clear. "Are you mad at my mum?" Harry turned. The boy wasn't angry. He just looked worried, as if he thought everything in their lives depended on this moment. And suddenly, Harry Coleman, a man who'd survived boardroom wars, lawsuits, and political smear campaigns, felt like he couldn't breathe. He nodded once, not knowing what else to say, then climbed into the car. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake in a bedroom bigger than Victoria's entire apartment, staring up at the carved ceiling. The silence was thick. All he could hear was that small voice. "Are you mad at my mom?" And then another voice layered over it. "See? Mommy brought our food." He shut his eyes hard, but the images wouldn't leave. Elijah's wheelchair, Amari's arms wrapped around a loaf of bread, Victoria's hands shaking as she whispered, "You don't get to help me now." He reached for the picture frame on his nightstand, a photo he hadn't looked at in years. His daughter, Anna, age 10, tooth missing, laughing so hard the camera caught her mid-giggle. That was the last time she'd looked at him like he mattered. He gently turned the photo face down. Meanwhile, Victoria sat beside her children, watching them eat peanut butter sandwiches by dim light. Her eyes were tired, but alert. Always alert. Elijah tried to make her smile by turning the canned labels into a guessing game. Amari talked about how fast she ran in gym class, but Victoria barely spoke. She looked down at her hands. Breadcrumbs stuck to her palm, the hand that had pushed Harry Coleman's away. And still it trembled. She whispered under her breath, "No one sees us. We're invisible." She didn't know he had seen, and that he couldn't forget what he saw. The next morning, she walked into Vinland Estate with her spine straight, her uniform crisp and her heart bracing for impact. If he was going to fire her, he was going to do it to her face. She passed the chef in the hallway. He looked nervous. The housekeeper gave her a strange smile but said nothing. Then she entered the main sitting room and there he was, Harry Coleman, dressed in a robe, sitting in silence. No newspaper, no coffee, just waiting. She stopped at the doorway. "If this is where you let me go, say it. I have kids to feed." He stood. "I owe you an apology." She blinked, stunned. "I had no right to follow you. I've ignored you for years, and I'm not proud of that. But after yesterday," he hesitated, "I saw more of life in 10 minutes outside your house than I've seen in the last 10 years inside this estate." Victoria didn't soften. She didn't fold. She folded her arms instead. "I don't need your guilt," she said. He nodded. "I know." The silence that followed wasn't hostile this time. It was human. If you're still watching this, feeling something, then you understand what it means to be overlooked, to carry the weight, to raise children on empty wallets and full hearts. These are the stories we tell. Don't just watch, subscribe, because every view counts, but every subscriber says, "I see you." Victoria stood in the hallway long after Harry had left the room. The words he'd spoken replayed in her head. "I saw more of life in 10 minutes outside your house than I've seen in the last 10 years inside this estate." It sounded like honesty, maybe even regret. But she had learned a long time ago that regret didn't pay rent, and words didn't fix broken fridges. By noon, she was back in the laundry room, sorting silk linens that probably cost more than her kids' school tuition. Her hands moved on instinct, but her mind wasn't quiet. She'd built emotional walls to survive this job, walls he'd cracked last night, then chipped at again this morning. And now she didn't know what to do with the guilt sitting in her chest. Not hers. His. Across the estate, Harry sat in his home office, staring at his untouched computer screen. The morning stock reports were flashing on his tablet, emails stacked up. His assistant had left 3 voicemails, but he couldn't concentrate. He kept seeing Victoria's hands slapping his away, her voice trembling, the groceries on the porch, Elijah's eyes. This was not like him. He was supposed to be the man who compartmentalized everything. Feelings belonged in books. Weakness was for people who couldn't afford to keep moving. But something inside him refused to let go, and then came the second guessing. Had he overstepped? Had he humiliated her in front of her children? Was she right to hate him? He wanted to fix it. He just didn't know how. That evening, Victoria came home to find a package on her doorstep. A plain brown box. No label. No note. Inside were 3 bags of groceries, fresh fruits, meats, cereal, medicine. And at the very bottom, a single handwritten note. For your children. No expectations. H. She stood on the porch for a full minute, staring at the contents. Then, without a word, she took the box inside and shoved it under the kitchen sink. She wasn't ready to make peace with pity. The next morning, she walked into the estate with her head even higher. She didn't speak to Harry. He didn't speak to her. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer empty. It was charged. Later that week, Harry tried again. This time he left a donation receipt on her work table, a large check made out in her name, sent anonymously to a rehabilitation clinic in Providence. It was enough to get Elijah proper equipment and therapy for 6 months. She found it. She read it. And she left it, sitting on the counter. Victoria didn't want help. She wanted respect. She didn't need saving. She needed to be seen. So when Harry walked past her in the hallway the next day and tried to offer a smile, she met it with a stare. "You can't throw money at my life like it's a broken investment," she said. "That's not how you fix people." Harry didn't argue. "I'm not trying to fix you," he said softly. "I'm trying to unlearn myself." He walked away, unsure if that was the right thing to say, but somehow, for the first time, she didn't feel angry when he left the room. That night, Victoria sat in her tiny kitchen sipping tea. The box under the sink still hadn't been unpacked. Amari was asleep on the couch, hugging her mother's uniform like a blanket. Elijah sat beside the window, watching the stars. He turned and said, "He's different now, huh?" Victoria looked at her son, confused. "The man from the car," Elijah continued. "He looked scared, like someone who just figured out he was lost." She exhaled slowly. "I don't trust him," she said. Elijah nodded. "But maybe he trusts you." The next morning, Harry returned to the same bench at the back of Vinland where he used to sit alone for hours. But today, he brought something with him, a folder. Inside was a letter, not typed, not dictated, written in his own hand. That same day, Victoria walked into the kitchen and found it waiting for her. She didn't open it right away. She placed it on the table next to Elijah's spelling homework and stared at it while folding clothes. Something about this was different. This wasn't another receipt or a bag of groceries. This was a choice. Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single-page letter. "You don't owe me anything. Not your time, not your grace. But you gave me both anyway when I didn't deserve it. I won't pretend I understand your life, but I'm trying to learn from it. I see you now, Miss Ellison. And I want to keep seeing you. H.C." Victoria folded the letter carefully, and for the first time in days, she smiled. It started with a knock. Victoria was on her knees, scrubbing the corners of the east hallway floor, the kind of work most employers had long outsourced to machines, but not at Vinland, not with Harry Coleman. His house ran on old-world standards. She heard the knock again. 3 sharp taps echoing down the marble hallway. When she stood and wiped her hands, the housekeeper leaned out from the adjoining room, awkwardly clearing her throat. "Mr. Coleman wants you to accompany him to the greenhouse. He has a request." Victoria blinked. "Me?" "Yes." He was very specific. 10 minutes later, she found herself standing inside the estate's private greenhouse, a glass cathedral of orchids, climbing ivy, and jasmine vines. Sunlight filtered in, painting golden lines across the floor. Harry stood at the far end, awkwardly holding a watering can like it was a foreign object. She stayed at the door. "Mr. Coleman, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not." "I asked for you," he said, turning slowly. I've been trying to keep the orchids alive." She raised a brow. "You brought me out here for gardening tips." "I brought you out here because I can't keep anything alive in this house, not plants, not relationships, nothing." He set the watering can down. Victoria's eyes narrowed, cautious. Harry looked around the lush greenhouse. "This place was my wife's. She passed 8 years ago. I never touched it since. I didn't even know how the irrigation system worked." His voice wobbled slightly. "She would have liked you. You would have liked her too. She didn't pretend to be better than people." Victoria stepped forward slowly. "It's a beautiful space," she said. "It smells like peace." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying things that stay with me for days." Over the next week, things began to shift. Not dramatically, not loudly, but like the way autumn bleeds into winter. Quietly, completely. Harry started being present, not just with Victoria, but with the staff. He asked the chef where he was from. He helped the gardener carry mulch. Once, Victoria caught him on the kitchen floor trying to fix a loose tile. "Sir, you're not qualified for that," she said, arms crossed. He chuckled. "I'm not qualified for most of the things I've been doing lately." And still, he kept doing them. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, the heater in the estate's laundry room broke. The technician was hours away. Victoria's hands were freezing, but she kept folding. Harry walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. He set one beside her and leaned against the dryer. "You ever get tired of pretending you're okay?" he asked. She looked at him, then the tea. "I don't pretend," she said. "I just survive. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "Right. I've been pretending. You've been surviving." The silence between them felt warmer than the broken heater. She picked up the cup. "Thank you." That evening, Victoria stayed late. Amari had an after-school program, and Elijah was at therapy with a neighbor. For once, she didn't rush out the door. Harry found her in the main living room, adjusting pillows on the massive sectional. "You don't have to do that," he said. She paused. "Habit." He walked over, slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said, that you're not a charity case, that you don't need saving." She nodded. "Still true." He took a breath. "What if I don't want to save you? What if I want to know you?" She looked up at him. Not as a maid, not as a billionaire, just 2 tired souls in an empty room. A few days later, Harry asked Victoria if she'd help him organize his wife's old music collection. Hundreds of records, jazz, soul, gospel, vinyl so old it crackled like firewood when it played. They sat on the floor for hours, sleeves scattered around them like autumn leaves. "Do you miss her?" Victoria asked softly. Harry didn't answer at first, just stared at a Nina Simone record. "I miss who I was when she was alive," he said finally. "I was softer. I remembered birthdays. I laughed more." Victoria nodded. "Then maybe it's time you remember how." That night, as Victoria packed up to leave, Harry walked her to the door, something he'd never done before. Outside, the night was cool, the moon high and clear. Elijah and Amari waited in the car of their neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, waving from the back seat. Harry watched them closely. "They're good kids," he said. "They're everything," she replied. She stepped toward the car. "Victoria," he called out. She turned. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The look on his face said it all, and he wasn't just seeing her. He was beginning to feel her. The boxes were heavier than they looked. Victoria sat cross-legged on the floor of the estate's old music room, sorting through Harry's late wife's belongings, photo albums, keepsakes, a journal tucked between record sleeves. Harry stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching her more than the items. She picked up a framed photo of a younger Harry, his arm around a woman with soft eyes and a knowing smile. The woman looked nothing like Victoria, but everything about her seemed familiar. She had grace, Victoria said, turning the frame over gently, like someone who knew things without needing to say them. Harry smiled faintly. She could read people in a second, scared the hell out of me. Victoria chuckled softly, then paused. She reached into another box and pulled out a ribbon, identical to the one she wore on her uniform every day, blue, faded, with a name stitched on it, Elijah. Harry froze. "I've seen that ribbon before," he whispered. "On you." She nodded slowly. "It's my son's." Harry took a step forward, the memory unraveling in his mind. "That day in the mirror, you touched it like it meant everything." "It does," Victoria said. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "Elijah wasn't always in a wheelchair. 2 years ago there was an accident. A driver ran a red light. We were coming home from church." Harry's throat tightened. "I broke my wrist. My daughter had a concussion. Elijah, he hasn't walked since." She took a breath. "We lost everything after that. My job, my apartment. The hospital bills stacked up like bricks. I slept in my car for 2 months with both kids until I found someone who knew someone who worked at Vinland." She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But Harry had never seen anyone look more wounded and strong at the same time. "I don't tell people," she said, "because I don't want pity. I want to work. I want my kids to grow up, knowing their mother didn't quit." Harry sat down across from her. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't expect you to." He looked at her for a long time, the guilt heavy in his chest. And then, slowly, he opened up a part of himself he hadn't touched in years. "I had a daughter," he said. "Anna." Victoria looked up. She was 10 when her mother died, 11 when she stopped speaking to me. He pulled out his wallet and handed Victoria a photo, one of those old Polaroids, yellowed at the edges. A girl with wild hair, missing a front tooth, holding a puppy in her arms. She wanted my attention. I gave her private school and a trust fund instead. She wanted bedtime stories. I gave her silence. Victoria held the photo carefully. "Where is she now?" "Boston, I think. She sends a card at Christmas. No return address." Victoria didn't speak, but in that moment, a connection quietly fused between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, just real. Two people who had lost things they didn't know how to name. Later that evening, after work, Victoria sat on her front porch alone. Elijah and Amari were inside, watching TV. The grocery box still sat under the sink, unopened, untouched. She finally pulled it out. She unpacked it slowly. Each item was still cold, fresh, considered. And at the bottom of the box was a folded envelope she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a note, no signature this time. Not for charity, for respect, for trying, for not quitting when I would have. Each. She folded it quietly and stared at the stars. The next morning, Victoria walked into Vinland Estate wearing a different uniform. The same style, but this time it was pressed perfectly and the ribbon on her chest was ironed smooth. It sparkled slightly in the morning sun. Harry looked up from his seat in the study. He didn't speak, just nodded. And Victoria, for the first time, nodded back. "You're still watching. That means something in you feels this. Maybe you've been where Victoria is, holding the pieces of your life together with both hands and no help. If this story reminds you of your own quiet battles, don't just scroll away. Subscribe. You're not alone. These stories are about you too. And if you already subscribed, thank you. From the bottom of every character's heart." That afternoon, Harry invited Victoria to join him for lunch in the garden, something that had never happened in 20 years of staff at Vinland. She hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person who tells me the truth," he said. And for the first time, she sat down, not as the help, not as a project, as a person. And Harry listened, really listened, as she spoke about Elijah's stubbornness, Amari's imagination, and the dream she once had of opening her own bakery. When she laughed at her own story, Harry laughed too. Something was changing, and this time, neither of them was resisting it. The garden lunch became a quiet ritual. Every Wednesday afternoon, Harry and Victoria sat beneath the same tree at the far edge of Vinland's manicured lawn, not in formal silence, not across a long table, but shoulder to shoulder, on a bench too small for pretense. There were no place settings, no waitstaff, just sandwiches, lemonade, and stories. At first, the conversation was light. Amari's obsession with coloring books, Elijah's newfound love of jazz music, and Harry's confusion over why children now follow strangers on the internet. But as the weeks went on, the walls came down further. One afternoon, Victoria told him how she used to bake pies with her grandmother every Sunday before church. "Peach cobbler?" Harry guessed. "Sweet potato," she corrected, "with a cinnamon crust." His eyes lit up. "I haven't had sweet potato pie since 1984, she laughed. "Then you haven't really lived since 1984. That same week, she brought in a slice wrapped in foil. He took one bite and closed his eyes. "My God," he whispered, "I think I saw heaven." "You've been rich too long," she said, laughing. "You forgot what soul tastes like." He didn't disagree. One afternoon, it started to rain unexpectedly during their lunch. The sky cracked open, sending a soft mist over the garden before either of them could move. Victoria grabbed the sandwiches. Harry grabbed the tea. They dashed under the patio roof like two teenagers, breathless, laughing. And then, for a moment, time stopped. Harry looked at her. Soaked shoulders, damp curls stuck to her forehead, eyes lit up with joy, and realized how long it had been since he had genuinely laughed. Not a polite chuckle at a board meeting, real laughter. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he said softly. "You just remind me of someone I never became." Her laughter faded, replaced by a quiet warmth. "I remind you of yourself?" "No," he said. "You remind me of someone I wish I'd known, before I turned into this." She didn't reply, but she didn't look away. That evening, Victoria invited Harry to visit her home, not for a meeting, not for guilt, but because Elijah wanted to show him something. Harry hesitated. Then he went. He stood outside her modest apartment as Elijah wheeled over with a piece of cardboard taped with wires, tin foil, and LED lights. "I built a nightlight for Mom," the boy said proudly. "It turns off when the sun rises." Harry knelt beside him. "That's genius. You made this yourself?" "This, with stuff from Miss Johnson's trash and a YouTube video." Harry smiled, completely in awe. He turned to Victoria. "He's got an engineer's brain." She nodded, pride shining through every pore. "And a poet's heart." Later, Harry sat on the old couch with Amari, who curled up beside him like they'd known each other forever. She offered him her last chocolate chip cookie. He took half. She pouted. He gave it back. She giggled and hugged his arm. And just like that, a man who once thought he was too old to feel anything found himself feeling everything. As Harry got up to leave that night, Victoria walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "No," he replied. "Thank you for letting me come." There was a long pause. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but possibility. Back at Vinland, Harry didn't go straight to bed. He went into the music room, turned on the old record player, and let the sound of Nina Simone fill the space. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. The next morning, Victoria arrived to find a small vase of wildflowers on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation, but she smiled, because she knew exactly who they were from and what they meant. That night, she baked 2 full pies, One for her children, and one for Harry Coleman. It was supposed to be a good day. Victoria had just finished folding the linens in the guest quarters when Harry called her into the sunroom, the same place where they had once shared awkward silence, and later, quiet laughter. But today, his voice was clipped. His hands were clenched. He held a piece of paper in his hand. "Victoria," he said slowly, "I got a call this morning from someone in payroll." She frowned, unsure. "They flagged your employee profile for irregular tax information. They ran it through public databases and found something." He slid the paper toward her on the table. Victoria looked down. Her full name. Social Security number. But beneath that, a line that stole the breath from her lungs, previous conviction, fraudulent identity use. She stared at it for a long time, then looked up at him. "You had me investigated?" His jaw tightened. "I had my team look into a red flag." "No, no, Harry," she interrupted. Her voice cracked. "You trusted me. You sat in my home. You broke bread with my children. And then, you had your people dig through my past like I'm some kind of criminal." "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "But it did," she snapped, "and now we're here." Her hands were shaking now and her eyes welled up, not just from anger, from betrayal. Harry stepped forward. I didn't understand. Why it wasn't on your application." I panicked. "You think I'd risk everything again to lie about something like that?" she said. "You think I wanted that on my record?" She held the paper up, trembling. "I was 19, homeless. I used a cousin's ID to apply for a job because I couldn't get hired anywhere. It was either that or sleep in a shelter again. They arrested me on my second day." She dropped the paper on the floor. "You know what hurts the most?" she whispered. "You looked at me like I was human, like maybe I mattered to someone. And now you look at me like you're building a case." Harry's shoulders slumped. "Victoria." "No," she said, her voice final. "We're done." She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the polished hallway. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did Harry. He stared at his phone for hours, typing and deleting message after message. He tried calling. She didn't answer. In her apartment, Victoria stared at the ceiling while Elijah and Amari slept beside her. She didn't cry. She was past crying. But deep down, in the quiet place she never let anyone see, she had started to believe in something with Harry. Not love, but hope. And now, it was gone. At Vinland, the staff noticed the change immediately. Harry stopped showing up for garden lunches. The music room stayed locked. The flowers in the hallway wilted. The house was cold again. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Victoria went back to working her shifts. She was professional, silent, mechanical. She didn't speak to Harry, and he didn't speak to her, but their silence was louder than anything else in the house. One afternoon, Harry saw Amari again. She had come with Victoria to drop off a sweater she'd left behind in the laundry room. Amari looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Are you still mad at my mom?" Harry crouched down beside her. "No, sweet girl," he said quietly. "I'm mad at myself." She tilted her head. "Are you going to say sorry?" He looked away. "I don't know if I still get to." Later that night, Harry sat in the garden alone. The wind was colder now. The jasmine had stopped blooming. He pulled out the old letter Victoria once returned, the one he wrote after following her home. The ink had faded, but the words still punched. "I see you now, Miss Ellison, and I want to keep seeing you." He folded the letter back up, staring into the dark. Somewhere along the line, he had stopped seeing her again. The next morning, Victoria turned in her resignation. She handed the envelope to the housekeeper. "I'll finish the week, but I'm done after that." The housekeeper took it with a quiet nod. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. It wasn't just a job ending. It was a story, unfinished. The house was quieter than usual. Harry Coleman sat alone in his study. The room that once made him feel powerful now felt too big, too full of echoes, too full of memories he didn't know he was making. until they were gone. Victoria's resignation letter still sat on his desk, unopened. He couldn't bring himself to read it, because to read it meant admitting she was leaving, and that he had pushed her away. He looked down at the piano keys on the old upright in the corner. His late wife used to play. She tried to teach him once, but he never learned. He walked over and pressed a single note. It rang out softly, disappearing almost instantly. Just like her. Just like Victoria. Across town, Victoria stood in front of the stove, stirring a pot of soup that Amari said smelled better than magic. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Elijah rolled into the kitchen holding his tablet. "Mr. Coleman's company just announced a scholarship fund," he said, "for children with disabilities, named after his wife." Victoria turned slowly. "Elijah," he tapped the screen again. "Look, he launched it yesterday. They're giving 5 kids full rides to college, with therapy benefits too." Victoria stared at the glowing screen. Then, without saying a word, she turned off the stove. She sat on the edge of her bed, turning the envelope in her hands, the same one Harry had once left in her groceries. His handwriting. Short, honest, vulnerable. She hated how much it still moved her, hated how she could still hear his voice in her head. "I'm not trying to fix you, I'm trying to unlearn myself." She folded the envelope back up and stood, looking at herself in the mirror. "Are you really going to let it end like this?" she whispered. Her reflection didn't answer, but something in her chest shifted. At Vinland, Harry finally opened the resignation letter. It was simple, professional, cold. He read it twice, then again. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. Every sentence was respectful, every word heartbreakingly distant. She had already let go, and now it was his turn to decide if he was going to fight for what mattered for once in his life. He stood up, walked to the music room and turned on her favorite record, Nina Simone, Low and Steady. Then he made a call. The next morning, Victoria woke to find a single envelope on her porch. Handwritten, no stamp, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. "You don't owe me anything, but I owe you everything. I failed to protect your dignity. I acted out of fear, and fear is a poor excuse for betrayal. If you never speak to me again, I understand. But if there's even a small piece of you that hasn't closed the door completely, I'll be waiting. Same place, same time. One last lunch, no pressure, no expectations. I just want to see you, not as the help, not as a mistake, as you." Her fingers trembled as she held the paper. That afternoon, Harry sat under the tree in the garden, alone, a sandwich untouched beside him, a cup of tea gone cold. The minutes dragged. The staff avoided the windows. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and then footsteps, slow, measured. Victoria. She said nothing. She didn't sit right away. She stood in front of him, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "I'm not here to forgive you," she said. Harry nodded. "I wouldn't ask you to. I'm not here to forget either. I wouldn't want you to." A long pause. Then she sighed and sat down beside him. "I'm here because I wanted to see if you'd show up." Harry turned to her. "I haven't stopped showing up since the day I saw your daughter thank you for bringing home food." She looked away, blinking back something she didn't want him to see. They sat in silence, the kind of silence that feels like a second chance. The garden bench had never felt so alive. Victoria didn't say much that day, neither did Harry, but somehow that silence held more meaning than 1,000 words. They sat side by side beneath the tree, the old oak casting shadows across the lawn like lace. The sun filtered through slowly, warming her shoulder, and for the first time in weeks she didn't flinch when he turned toward her. Harry cleared his throat. "There's one more thing," he said cautiously. She glanced over. "This should be good." He smiled, a bit nervous. "I've been working on something, quietly." Victoria raised a brow. "Another apology?" "No. A possibility." He pulled out a folded document from his coat pocket and slid it toward her. She unfolded it slowly. Her eyes scanned the top line. Vinland Foundation Grant Proposal, Ellison Co. Bakery. She froze. I don't understand. Harry's voice was calm. Sure. It's a full grant. Backed anonymously through the Vinland Foundation. No debts. No strings. Just startup funds. For your bakery. Your dream. Victoria's breath caught. You remembered. I listened, he corrected. That's something I used to be bad at. Now it's something I want to be good at. Starting with you. She stared at the paper. Her name in bold. Her idea. Finally real. I can't accept this, she whispered. It's too much. Harry shook his head. You already earned it. You've been doing the impossible on your own for years. Let someone believe in you, Victoria. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then her voice, small and honest. You broke me. He nodded. And you showed me who I really was. She looked up, eyes meeting his. I'm not promising anything, she said. I'm not asking you to, he replied. But when she smiled, that rare, quiet, crooked smile, something clicked between them. Not perfection, but understanding. The following Sunday, the doors of a small storefront in Newport creaked open. The sign above read, Ellison Commerce, Homemade with Heart. Inside, the walls were painted soft yellow. Photographs of Victoria's children lined the counter, and the air was filled with the scent of sweet potato pie and cinnamon bread. Amari stood behind the counter, wearing a tiny apron, taking her role as official cookie supervisor very seriously. Elijah sat by the front window, legs crossed in his chair, working on a flyer for their first community bake sale. And just behind the register, Victoria stood, flour on her cheeks, her hands busy, her heart full. The bell above the door rang. Harry walked in, dressed simple, no suit, no tie, just a man. He looked around, then at her. It's perfect, he said. Victoria wiped her hands. It's a start. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a gift box. She hesitated before taking it. Inside was a tiny silver pin shaped like a ribbon. He smiled gently. For Elijah. She closed the box softly, then did something that stunned even herself. She leaned in and hugged him, not tightly, not romantically, but genuinely. A hug that said, we made it, despite everything. Outside, customers waited in line, neighbors, staff from Vinland, even Mrs. Johnson. They came not just for the pies, but for the story. A story of redemption, of forgiveness, of a woman who didn't give up, and a man who finally woke up. If this story made you feel something, even a small ache in your chest, don't scroll away. Take a second to subscribe. Not for us, but for the Victorias out there. The ones still working 2 jobs, the kids still waiting for their miracle, the people who love quietly, fight quietly, and rise quietly. Your one click helps us keep telling stories that matter. So if this one touched you, let us know you're out there. Subscribe. Because stories like this, they aren't fiction. They're real, and they're worth being heard. As the line grew longer outside the bakery, Victoria looked up at the sign one more time. Her name, her dream, her children. And somewhere in the back, Harry sipped tea and smiled. Not because he'd saved her, but because she had saved herself, and let him be a small part of it.